From Chains to Change, the untold story of slavery's survivors and their legacy. Imagine this: the crack of a whip, the cry of a child torn from their mother, the clanking of chains against human skin. For over 400 years, this was not just a story. It was reality. Millions of men, women, and children were stolen from Africa, shackled, shipped like cargo, and forced into slavery across the Americas, Europe, and beyond. But this is not just a story of suffering. It is a story of survival, of those who endured the unimaginable and carved out legacies that still shape our world today. This is the untold story of slavery's survivors, their pain, their resilience, and the powerful legacy they left behind, stolen from home. The story begins on the coasts of West Africa, villages alive with laughter, marketplaces buzzing, children running free, until foreign ships appeared on the horizon. Survivors' voice, historical account, adapted. They took us in the night. Fires lit up the sky. We were bound. We were screaming, and no one came to save us. Over 12 million Africans were captured and forced onto slave ships, crammed together in unspeakable conditions, chained to wooden planks with barely enough air to breathe. One survivor of the Middle Passage recalled, "The stench was so foul I thought death would come." But death did not come, and that, perhaps, was the cruelest part. Nearly 2 million never survived the voyage. Their bodies were thrown into the sea, an ocean that still carries their silent graves. Life in chains for those who survived the journey. The nightmare had only begun. On plantations in the Americas, enslaved people worked from sunrise to sunset under brutal overseers. They harvested sugar, cotton, rice, and tobacco, the very crops that built the wealth of nations. But they were not workers. They were treated as property, bought and sold at auctions, separated from families, denied names, culture, and language. Frederick Douglass once said, "I have witnessed the sale of a young mother, her infant clinging to her breast. She sobbed not for herself, but for the babe that was to be torn from her arms." Yet, despite the horror, enslaved Africans carried pieces of home with them, songs, rhythms, and faith. What the whip could not destroy, memory preserved. Spirituals sung in the fields became coded messages of resistance. Drums became weapons of unity. Stories whispered at night kept alive the heritage they were told. To forget, the spirit of resistant slavery was built on the illusion of control, but enslaved people resisted at every turn. Some fought back physically, leading revolts that shook empires. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 terrified slave owners across the American South. The Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint Louverture, and others defeated Napoleon's armies and made Haiti the first free black republic in 1804. Others resisted through escape. The Underground Railroad became a lifeline, a secret network that led thousands to freedom. Harriet Tubman's voice, adapted. "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." Resistance wasn't just about rebellion. It was about survival. Every prayer whispered, every song sung, every step toward freedom was a declaration. We are still human. You cannot break us, emancipation. But not freedom. In the 19th century, the tides began to shift. Britain outlawed the slave trade in 1807, and by the mid-1800s, slavery began to collapse under the weight of moral outrage, abolitionist movements, and rebellion. In the United States, the Civil War led to the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, which declared enslaved people free. However, freedom on paper did not necessarily translate to freedom in life. Former slaves stepped into a world that still saw them as less than human. They faced poverty, violence, and systemic racism that echoed the chains they thought they had broken. Quote from a freedman in 1865, "We were free, yes, but free to do what? Free to starve? Free to be beaten again? Freedom was not the end. It was the beginning of another struggle. Legacy of strength despite the odds, slavery's survivors left behind more than scars. They left behind strength. They built schools and churches, carved out businesses, and created communities that still stand today. Their music became the roots of jazz, blues, gospel, and hip-hop. Their food traditions transformed cuisines around the world. Their fight for justice laid the foundation for civil rights movements of the 20th century and beyond. Every generation carried its fire forward. From the spirituals of the enslaved, to the sermons of Martin Luther King Jr., to the chants of Black Lives Matter, this is their legacy. A legacy of endurance. A legacy of change. The story of slavery is not just about chains. It is about change. About how, even in the darkest times, human beings refused to let their spirit die. Today, we remember not just their suffering, but their survival, not just their pain, but their power, because history tried to bury their voices. But we will not let them be forgotten. They were more than slaves. They were mothers, fathers, dreamers, fighters. They were survivors, and their legacy lives on in us. Freedom's false promise. The Civil War ended in 1865, and the United States declared slavery abolished through the 13th Amendment. But listen closely, because freedom wasn't freedom for all. Yes, chains were broken. Yes, plantations were emptied. But the system of oppression simply changed its mask. Southern states passed black codes, laws designed to keep freed black people powerless. They couldn't vote, couldn't own land in many areas, couldn't even walk at night without being arrested. And if they were arrested, they were sent to prison, then leased out as convict labor. It was slavery by another name. Voice from a freed man, recorded in the 1930s. They said we were free, but they put chains on us all over again. The only difference was they called it something else. The promise of 40 acres and a mule for every freed family never came. Instead, most were forced into sharecropping, renting land from the same white masters they once served, stuck in endless cycles of debt. Freedom was not the end of oppression, it was the beginning of a new fight. The rise of Jim Crow. By the late 1800s, the South had found a new weapon: segregation. Under Jim Crow laws, black people were forced into separate schools, separate restaurants, separate train cars, and separate neighborhoods. Separate but equal, the law said. But in reality, it was separate and never equal. Lynchings became a tool of terror. Black men, women, and even children were murdered by mobs, often for the crime of looking at someone the wrong way. These killings were public, photographed, and sometimes turned into postcards. It was violence, yes, but it was also a message. Know your place. Stay silent. Don't rise too high. Yet even in this age of terror, survivors of slavery and their children fought back. They built schools like Tuskegee Institute, founded by Booker T. Washington, himself born enslaved. They wrote books, started newspapers, and formed churches that became the heartbeat of resistance. The flame of resilience did not go out. It simply burned in secret, waiting for its moment. Culture as resistance. If you want to understand survival, look at the culture. The descendants of enslaved Africans transformed pain into power. The sorrow songs sung in the fields evolved into blues, the cry of a people who refused silence. Gospel and spirituals gave birth to jazz, America's first true art form. Later came rock, soul, funk, reggae, hip-hop, sounds that carried the voice of survival across the globe. Food, too, became a legacy. From gumbo in Louisiana to jerk chicken in the Caribbean, African traditions fused with local ingredients, creating dishes that carried history in every bite. Even language carried resistance. Words and rhythms from Yoruba, Igbo, and Akan mixed into Creole, Gullah, and Caribbean dialects. Languages born from the struggle to communicate under oppression. Culture was more than art. It was survival. A way of saying, we are still here. The long march to civil rights, by the mid-20th century, the children and grandchildren of slavery's survivors had had enough. The world watched as Black Americans stood up against segregation, demanding the rights they had been promised nearly a century earlier. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of dreams that went beyond chains. Malcolm X declared freedom by any means necessary. Students marched, sat in, faced dogs, hoses, and prisons, and slowly the walls began to crack. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave Black citizens the right to vote without fear. But change did not come overnight, and the ghosts of slavery still haunted every step forward. Global echoes of slavery. Slavery was not just an American story. It was global. Brazil received more enslaved Africans than any other country, with slavery lasting there until 1888, the last nation in the Americas to abolish it. In the Caribbean, sugar plantations fueled European wealth while destroying African lives. Haiti's victory in 1804 was rare, but its punishment was severe. France demanded reparations so crippling, Haiti remained trapped in poverty for centuries. Even today, Europe's great cities, London, Liverpool, Lisbon, Amsterdam, still carry the wealth of the slave trade in their buildings, banks, and monuments. The survivors of slavery did not just shape one nation. They shaped the entire modern world. Memory, trauma, and legacy. Here's the truth. Trauma does not vanish with time. The chains of slavery may have been broken, but the scars were passed down through generations of poverty, exclusion, and systemic racism. Psychologists call it intergenerational trauma. The pain of great-great-grandparents can echo in the lives of their descendants, but alongside trauma came strength, the ability to endure, to rebuild, to rise again. And that strength is the true legacy of slavery's survivors. They left behind not only broken chains, but also the blueprint for resistance, resilience, and change. The chains that remain. Slavery officially ended more than 150 years ago, but its shadow stretches into the present. Consider the numbers. The racial wealth gap in America is staggering. The average white family holds nearly 10 times the wealth of the average Black family. Black Americans are more likely to be denied loans, live in underfunded neighborhoods, and attend poorly resourced schools. Mass incarceration has become a modern chain. Though Black Americans are about 13% of the population, they make up nearly 40% of the prison population. Some call this the new Jim Crow, a system where blackness is still criminalized. Every statistic is not just a number. It is a legacy. It is the echo of slavery whispering across centuries, the reparations, debate. Here's the hard truth. America was built on slavery's back. The White House, Wall Street, Ivy League universities, so much of the nation's wealth came from unpaid Black labor. So the question rises, should the descendants of the enslaved be compensated? This debate isn't new. After the Civil War, formerly enslaved people asked for the land they had worked for generations. The government promised them 40 acres and a mule, but that promise was quickly broken. Today, cities like Evanston, Illinois, and universities like Georgetown have begun experimenting with reparations through housing grants, scholarships, or financial aid. But on a national level, America still wrestles with its conscience. Some say, it's too late. Others argue, it's never too late to make things right. The question of reparations is not just about money. It's about recognition. It's about acknowledging that the wounds of slavery never fully healed. Black excellence. Yet, while the scars remain, so too does brilliance. The descendants of slavery did not only survive, they thrived. reshaping the world in ways unimaginable to their captors. In politics, Barack Obama rose to the presidency, a direct challenge to the history of oppression. In culture, black music, from hip-hop to R&B, dominates global charts. In sports, names like Serena Williams, LeBron James, and Usain Bolt are etched into history. In literature, voices like Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and James Baldwin carved truth into the world. Black excellence is not an exception. It is a continuation of the resilience born on slave ships and plantations. Every achievement whispers back through time. The chains could not hold us. Memory. Across the world, the legacy of slavery does not live only in America. In Gorée Island, Senegal, tourists walk through the door of no return, where countless Africans were forced onto ships. In London, Paris, Lisbon, and Amsterdam, statues and streets still honor the men who grew rich from human trafficking. In the Caribbean, descendants of enslaved people carry cultures that blend African rhythms with European and indigenous influences. Across the world, museums, memorials, and grassroots movements fight to keep the memory alive, because forgetting is dangerous. Forgetting allows chains to be reforged. Remembering is resistance. Lessons for the future. The story of slavery is not just about the past, it's about the choices we make today. Will we confront injustice? Will we break the hidden chains of racism, poverty, and inequality? Or will we pretend the past has no claim on the present? The survivors of slavery left us more than stories. They left us a warning, and they left us a challenge. They are gone. But their blood runs in millions. Their voices echo in protests, in classrooms, in songs, in prayers. Their fight is not finished. It is ours to carry, from chains to change, from the darkness of the slave ships to the brightness of global stages. The story of slavery's survivors is not one of defeat. It is a story of survival, of rebuilding, of transforming chains into songs, suffering into strength, oppression into art. It is the story of a people who were never meant to rise, yet did, and their legacy demands we rise too. Because history is not just behind us, it is inside us. And the choice we make today will decide whether the future is bound by chains or freed by change. Thanks for watching. If you believe these stories need to be heard, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep history alive.